My name is Brandon Jones, and I'm an engineer on the Chrome team at Google. But for the purposes of this talk today, I'm primarily one of the spec editors for the WebXR API. Now, if you're not familiar with the WebXR API, I'll give a really quick overview. It basically is just an API for JavaScript that performs in the web browser that's for interacting with virtual reality and augmented reality hardware like this. And it has not quite launched yet. We'll get into that in just a moment, but we're hoping to have it out and stable soon so that fine web developers like yourself can build immersive content for the web and distribute it freely to whomever you want. We're developing the spec under the umbrella of the Immersive Web Working Group, which is a W3C working group. And we recently established a roadmap. Now, those of you who have been following this for a little while have probably known that it's taken us a little bit to get to this point. And so the very first thing that I want to establish is what that roadmap is and give you some actual concrete dates. I'm sure somebody in the group is going to be excited about that. This is the Tony Parisi slide.
Yay, Tony.
So for those of you who aren't familiar, we're going to give a super brief history lesson for the API. This whole effort was started about 5 years ago with myself and Vlad at Mozilla. It was just kind of a goof on Twitter, and we both started this API. It turned into what we call the WebXR API. And that developed far enough along that several browsers actually shipped it, Edge and Firefox and some of the in-headset browsers. But we got to a point pretty quickly where we recognized that the API was not going to evolve well. It wasn't going to, it already was starting to not meet the needs of the hardware at that point, and we could see very clearly that in a few years the hardware was going to move way past what that API was capable of handling. And so we reconvened and tried to address a lot of feedback and about pain points from developers and platform owners and whatnot, and that effort was reborn as WebXR in late 2017. In the meantime, we formed the W3C Immersive Web Working Group around it. We already had a community group, which is still going strong, but the working group is one of those formalization steps towards becoming a real spec. And right now, we are on the final stretch to the candidate recommendation, which is the point where we can say that we're not done, but like we have shipped the spec. And for any of you who have been here since step one, it's probably felt a lot like this. And I apologize for that. It has taken a long while to get here, but we really truly are in the finishing stretches. So here's the dates that I promised. The most recent milestone that we've passed in our project is put together a working draft for TAG review. Now, TAG is a W3C entity that stands for Technical Advisory Group. We pass the spec off to them and say, this is something that we think is on its way to shipping. Give us feedback about it. This is a group of very well web-acquainted people. They've got great experience with the platform. They know a lot about what works well and what doesn't in that context, and they can give us some really great advice. We've already gotten great advice from them in the context of WebVR, and we expect more in this case. Coming up very, very soon, we're going to have what we call the VR Complete Working Draft, which we hope to cut on July 1st, like about a month. And then we go for the candidate recommendation draft at the end of the year. Now, that does not mean that you're going to start seeing this ship at the end of the year. It'll actually probably be earlier, and we'll get into that. So VR Complete, like I said, this is going to be in July. That's our aim anyways. That's what's on the roadmap. Now, what we want to do here is establish WebVR parity. Like I said, WebVR is already out there on the web, and we want to deliver something that we can comfortably say fully replaces that feature set. The core API at that point is going to be pretty locked down, and there's going to be a much, much higher bar for us to actually go and break anything. We want to start developing a sense with web developers that you can actually rely on this to not be changing under your feet, which has been the case for the last little while. And this is the point where browsers may actually start shipping this and turning it on by default and making it available to web users at large, even though the spec is technically not locked down yet. Then in December, we get to the point where we become a real standard, hopefully, by sending this off to the W3C for approval to become a candidate recommendation. And that's the point where the W3C says, we recommend that all browsers implement this API. That's ideally where everybody wants to get when you're building a standard. Now, the key to notice here is that ideally, by the time we reach this point, a couple of browsers have already shipped compatible implementations of the API. So if we get to this point and it hasn't already shipped, then we're not doing our job correctly. December is the point by which, it's just a technicality to get somebody to say, yes, this is good. So as you can see, we're really close. We're all feeling very good about where the API is at, and we think we'll be shipping imminently. Before it actually gets to shipping, you'll probably see some, origin trials and whatnot in Chrome. For those who want to jump on a little bit earlier. And I'll have more information about that, not in this meeting, but I'll post things on Twitter as they happen. So now I want to take a moment to talk about, that was a lot of dry information about dates for those who are already familiar with things, but I want to take a step back, and for anybody who's not as familiar with WebVR and WebXR and all these immersive web things, I want to talk about kind of what the promise of the immersive web is. And I'm going to start off with that. By talking about something that our wonderful Ricardo Cabello, who is in the back somewhere, I just saw him, posted on Twitter talking about, once again, this device, the Oculus Quest. And I'll jump into here so I can actually play the video. So this is actually a web page that he went and coded up with 3JS, is based on a previous example that he'd already done. And it just kind of worked. This device came out, and he went and pulled up some of his old code, and it was just working. And yeah, there's Ricardo. And do a little bit of work on the matrix math to make sure the dollar bills are coming off in the right place, and then it's done. And that's amazing. And you could, he talked about how he did this in Glitch and developed right from his, oops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. Developed right from his local browser. And it was a really nice, smooth development pattern. This is enabled because the browser on this thing is actually Chromium-based. It's an older version. It's Chrome 66 that it's based on, but all the dev tools work, which is really critical. And that looks something like this. Now, I really, really wanted to be able to actually do a live demo and show you what's going on in the headset up here, but that didn't pan out today. I apologize. So instead, I'll just talk about a little bit about what the workflow looks like here. But I've got this plugged into just the USB-C port on my Chromebook. And I want to point out, it's a Chromebook. I know it's behind the thing, so you can't see it, but it's a Pixelbook actually. This is not a big, beefy Windows development machine. It does not run Unity or do anything like that. But this will still interface with it because it has a web browser that can talk to this web browser. And then you get, if you go to About Inspect in your web browser, and you can do this for Android phones too if you don't know, which is really cool, then you get this thing that says, hey, I recognize that I've got a browser connected to me. It's coming from the Quest. It's, this browser, this version, all that. And if I click on this thing, then it actually lets me open up an inspector toolbar to the actual page that's running on here. That's like a live view of the web page that you could see in here. And unfortunately, if I click the button that says make it go VR, then it doesn't show properly in here. But even after I've clicked that, all of the console messages still come through correctly. All of the sources come through. This is a full debugging suite for the web page that's running in that thing. And that's pretty amazing. And from inside the headset, let's jump back into here really quick. What you see is something like this. So it's just a web browser. It curves around a little bit for ergonomic reasons. It's built into the Oculus system. But yeah, this is just a web page, and it's full screen in this particular case. There's a little Enter VR button here. And if you click that, then the page itself takes over your full view. And I already showed that. And it looks a little something like this. Once again, stealing some of Mr. Doob's video because he's good at capturing this stuff, and I'm not. So this is what you'd see in the headset. you can pick up these controllers. They're fully tracked in space. He's just sitting there waving them around like this, shooting balls off everywhere. You can back out of it, go click on a new example, click the Enter VR button, and now I'm in a completely different virtual space. Never left the browser. And again, it's really simple to go back and forth in and out of this. And for any of these, you could jump into the inspector at any point in time, click pause, set a breakpoint, whatever, and start debugging it just like you would any other web page. And that's awesome. I'm so excited about that. So now, that's all really cool, and it is working today. That's what shipped in this piece of hardware. So why am I talking about it shipping in the first part of this spec, or in the first part of this talk about the spec? Well, that's because everything that you just saw there was running on WebVR. And as I mentioned in the first little bit, WebVR it was a good first step, and it got us to this point of technical feasibility. We could prove that it was going to work. But the API itself was not well conditioned to evolve with VR hardware. And we want to make sure that it's going to be a specification that is around for the long haul and supports the next decade worth of VR hardware that comes out. So let's talk about some of the reasons why you would actually care about the new API versus what's already out there. For one, it's just overall a significantly improved API. Now, I am totally biased in this case. I'm the editor. It's my baby. I tend to think it's nicer. But I think the important part is we've taken a lot of developer feedback in as we've been working on this over the years. We've heard about all the things that are painful, all the things that are confusing, especially because a lot of web developers tend not to be graphics developers. And there's only so much we can shield you from that. Folks like Ricardo tend to pick up the slack where we leave off, but there are definitely areas where we knew that it was problematic with the APIs as they were, and we went through a lot of effort to address them. We've also put a lot of effort into recently making sure that the API itself is really oriented around user privacy and consent, and making sure that as a user of your product, people feel in control. They know what's going on. They know what data is exposed. They know how to get out of it. They know that it's a comfortable experience for them, and it's something they can trust, because that's a big part of the web, is that you can generally trust that what you're going to and what you're seeing isn't going to just be able to randomly steal all your data, or isn't going to make you wildly uncomfortable, and we want that to carry through to the immersive web as well. There's a lot of rendering improvements that have been made possible by the newer API. When we first started prototyping WebXR, and this was about a year ago, one of our engineers, Klaus, found that he could get 50% more pixels out of WebXR versus WebVR at the same at the same frame rate. And so it just automatically gave you a bump in clarity if you were using the new API. We're also making it so that if you're rendering content to the 2D web page and to VR, you want to be able to click back and forth between them, like Ricardo's demo was just showing. That works through a single code path where it didn't previously. And we also make sure that it's handling more exotic configurations. So there's the Pimax headset that actually has 4 physical screens. WebVR would not handle that. WebXR does. And it does so with almost no effort on your part as the developer. We got a lot of complaints about how input was handled, and so we totally revamped that system. There's a unified system that handles clicks on the page versus gaze systems like Cardboard or Gear VR versus fully handheld controllers. They all can be interacted with in a generally unified way. And then for those that do have buttons, we have much better support for the Gamepad API, which is how we were surfacing input previously in WebVR, but we've totally overhauled how we're handling that and doing it in a much more thoughtful, predictable way. Including things like standardizing layouts so you know which button maps to what on the controller. We're also establishing, as part of the community group, this CDN, so that you can look at the name of a controller and then go out and say, what does that actually look like? And we'll be able to give you back a 3D mesh that says, this is what the controller that the user's actually holding looks like, based on the ID that you just gave us. This is all the metadata about it. This is how the buttons map, everything like that. We're trying to give you a better understanding of the user space. This is something that was really difficult in the old API. You had to do a lot of matrix math yourself. And now in this one, in the new API, you can say, look, I want to have a space that is floor aligned and tells me where the safe boundaries around the user are. And if that's available, we can tell you that. If not, we allow you to fall back and say, okay, well, just give me something that's floor aligned, and I'll expect the user to generally stay still. And we can differentiate between all of those, including all the way up to, give me a space where the user can just wander to the ends of the earth and beyond, and we can do that too for AR hardware, whether it be phones or headsets. Speaking of which, we're also making sure that this API does handle AR, both in like HoloLens, Magic Leap style headsets, and the much, much more common ARCore and ARKit driven mobile experiences that you see through like Pokemon Go and that kind of thing. It's coming, it's going to be, it's already, AR is already here, it's going to be bigger as time goes on. If we don't deliver an API that can at least extend handle it down the road, then it's dead on arrival. So this was a huge reason why we needed to do that WebXR revamp. So in summary, this whole WebXR effort is just about making sure that once we deliver a spec that has shipped to you as the developers, it's performant, predictable, reliable, and we can say confidently that it's going to be around for generations of virtual reality and augmented reality devices to come. So thank you. Again, my name is Brandon Jones. Now, if you would, thank you. If you would like to ask me more about the API itself, or see what the demo that I was actually talking about actually looks like, or even just play around with some of the hardware and chat, I'm going to be in a room over here labeled Broom Closet. Feel free to come find me, and otherwise, enjoy the rest of the speakers for tonight. Thank you.